Well, hello plant lovers. It is Matthew in Melbourne. Thank you very much for finding me in this complex and crowded world of YouTube orchid videos. I grow cold, cool, intermediate orchids here in Melbourne, Australia, without a greenhouse or heaters or humidifiers or grow lights, just me and them struggling along together inside or outside or not at all. So that sounds like your bag. Hit subscribe. I post every week on a Friday. I am a complete amateur, and the whole point of this is trying to figure out how I can grow things successfully and maybe help you in the process. And today, I think I should wave every flag and set off fireworks because this, plant lovers, is a Cattleya. I know, a dime a dozen on every YouTube orchid video out there, but I am in Melbourne, which is southern Australia, which is not subtropical or tropical. Let me just say, we have, well, cold winters. We don't get to freezing in the inner city of Melbourne, but it is cold and wet and miserable in winter in Melbourne, as anyone from Melbourne can attest. Also, we do tend to get 4 seasons in every day, so you can also get bright sunny weather in winter. But anyway, essentially, we are not the ideal climate for growing Cattleyas. Most of the ones you see in this country grow further up the coast. So the further north you get on the east coast of Australia, you get to Sydney, subtropical, and then all the way up to tropical in the northern parts of the country, which of course Cattleyas love. Very, very similar conditions to the ones that they're used to in Central and South America, their homeland. And Cattleyas are kind of, I don't know, they're one of those very orchidy flowers. I know that sounds silly, but just one of those things that I guess people really associate with orchids. When you say the name, you'll probably see a flower that looks not dissimilar to this. So everyone grows them, very common, and they're easy-ish to grow, allegedly. Of course, depends on the type, but I have had no luck whatsoever because I don't have greenhouses and humidifiers and heaters. So the Cattleyas that I've tried to grow have either had to manage inside or outside with our cool nighttime winter minimums and see who comes out the strongest. Now, I did make a video about Cattleya maxima, so I guess the point is that it's a huge landmass, Central and South America, that's hugely varied environmental conditions for orchids to grow in. So there are some that are high altitude and cool growers, and some that grow much closer to sea level and really like hot, humid conditions and everything in between. There are some that can take really exposed conditions and some that like a bit more shade. So what I have learnt in these struggling years of trying to grow Cattleyas is that there are some cooler growing Cattleyas from higher misty mountains, and they are the ones, all their hybrid offsprings, that I need to try and find. And so I have. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is Cattleya skinneri. Although this one is the Alba form, which means pure white. And as you can see, it is. There is a hint of lemon yellow in the lip there, but otherwise it is look at that flower. It is a perfectly white flower. And it was named in 1836 after, surprise, surprise, a Mr. Skinner, a George U-R-E Skinner. Odd middle name, U-R-E. And he was based in Guatemala, and he was collecting orchids and sending them back to Britain to begin fueling that sort of orchid mania that took place in the 19th century and possibly was responsible for so much of the over harvesting of lots of these wild native orchids. Anyway, that aside, we are forever grateful for Mr. Skinner for having this orchid named after him and for actually finding it in the first place. And a very beautiful tuberosy fragrance. Stunning. Okay, so let us just go through some of the details about me growing this. And I should also just give you some background as to why the flower is a little damaged, but we'll get to that. So the first thing is Cattleyas in Melbourne, tricky. You really got to find, or in a climate like mine, you've got to find the ones that like cooler conditions. That's the first thing to do. Now, the way you can do that is you can look at a site called orchidspecies.com, and I'll put that below. And if you Google an orchid that you find, you'll be able to see where it's from, and there's a little indicator of whether it's cool, warm, intermediate, etc. So that's a good place to start. But if you've got a hybrid Cattleya, then you need to go to orchidroots.com, I'll put that below, and type in the name of your hybrid orchid. It will show you that orchid, and it will do its family tree and show you what the species origins were for that orchid. Then you Google each of those two separately in orchidspecies.com to show you what type of climate that orchid prefers or where its ancestors came from. And that will help so that if you're in a cooler climate, you'll be able to find some hybrids from the cooler growing Cattleyas that might do well in your climate. I know it's a bit of a labyrinthine path, but if you're not in perfect Cattleya country, then that's, I'm afraid, plant lovers, what we have to do when we're growing Cattleyas in a slightly chilly, damp condition in winter, such as Melbourne. So, Cattleya skinneri, here it is, a beautiful orchid. Now, the most common form of this is a very beautiful sort of magenta pink form, but Alba is a bit more unusual and harder to come by, and a pure white, fabulous. And the pink form is the national flower of Costa Rica. So it's very much a sort of a Central American plant. It's growing in southern Mexico, Honduras, El Salvador, Costa Rica, Guatemala. So quite a range and quite high altitude. Misty, moist forests, which is wonderful, but in bright conditions. I mean, there are Cattleyas that do like less light, but generally you can say the Cattleyas like bright light. So I'll show you now where I'm growing it. It's on a spot in my grow table outside. So it's outside all year. That does get the most sun, particularly in winter when it's quite dark outside in my growing area. So I've tried to give it the brightest spot that I can. And in winter, with all of my orchids outside, I really dial down the watering. So it's not moist to the touch and I really let it dry out. I'm only ramping up the watering now as we get into spring. So it does kind of by default have a bit of a drier rest in winter, but bright indirect sun for the rest of the time. Now, I bought it a year ago, just over a year ago actually, and it had flowered, and you can see that this is the spike that had flowered. There we go. And I bought it from eBay, largely because I was searching for these cooler climate orchids. Now, it's cooler climate, but it can also take warmer temperatures as well. So that's the great thing about some of these Cattleyas, that Skinneri particularly can take warmer tropical conditions if that's where you live. But anyway, so I've been searching on eBay and other places to try and find those cooler species. And this popped up. So I wasn't necessarily looking for the Alba form, but that's the one I got. And it was in a plastic pot. So I have repotted it into one of these sort of pre-made orchid pots. So it's got 4 aeration holes around the side. And the medium that I used is quite a large bark mix with a medium bark mix and a little bit of perlite and a little bit of sphagnum, because this is a moist grower. It does like to dry out though, so the sphagnum does dry out, but when it's moist, it does help retain a little bit of moisture in the pot. So that's how I've been growing it, and it is done really well. So this growth started to emerge about this time last year, I suppose. I'm recording this in late October, so mid-spring here in Australia. And the flower had, I can't remember if it actually opened or whether I bought it in spike anyway. I certainly had nothing to do with that spike. And then it produced its new growth, which is what Cattleyas will do. And as you can see, sort of a rhizomous plant. So the nib is just beginning to sort of bulge at the bottom here, where next season's growth is going to emerge. So you get that new spike, and each spike will produce a bloom, or hopefully more, as the plant starts to mature, so that you can start to get clusters of flowers. So my plant's still settling in. I'm just beyond excited that it's actually flowered for me, and I've kept this alive for a year because I don't have a great track record with Cattleyas. I've tried lots of different things, but this one I seem to have hit the sweet spot. But now, let's talk disappointments, and let's talk about the marks on this part of the flower here. So plant lovers, we have had a very windy spring in Melbourne, and you can see outside where this is growing, it's on the shelf, and above it, hanging on sort of the fence, are some other orchids. And it was a particularly windy night, and an orchid at the top blew off, fell down, hit this one, tipped it off onto the floor below, and it fell out of its pot. And when I picked it up to rescue it, I looked at it and I noticed that there was a flower spike in this growth, which I hadn't noticed before, and that it had got bashed in the fall. But anyway, so that's why we've got a little bit of a bruise on our Alba Skinneri. Look at that, stunning. Other than that though, it's in great health, and it survived the fall without snapping, which is great. And as I said, you can just see the swelling at the base of this node here, which is where next year's growth is going to be. So I am really getting my confidence levels up about certain Cattleyas. Now, I am not going to try and grow many Cattleyas at all. I'm only going to try and grow these high altitude, cooler growing ones and their hybrids, which I think can survive outside, because I just can't be bothered bringing them in winter, taking them out in spring, getting nervous about the minimums and should it go out, should it come in. I just want them to stay outside. It's just so much easier. So to do that, I've got to be really sure that they can take cooler winter minimums. And there are actually, allegedly, a lot of Cattleyas that can do that. So that is my task, and I've chosen to accept it, to find more cool growing Cattleyas. But this one has just filled me with joy because it's such a stunning flower. Look at the size of it too. It's really quite large and a very, very beautiful fragrance. The flower should last over a month, and it's been open now for quite a few weeks. It's mid-spring, as I said, and that's kind of the time that it would flower. In Costa Rica, the mauve version of this would flower in Easter. It's often called the Easter orchid. And so timing wise, it kind of makes sense. I'm in the Southern Hemisphere, so our Easter is not in spring. It's actually in late autumn. There we are. It is a stunning orchid and I'm just thrilled. Now, what else should we talk about? Fertilizer. As with other orchids of mine, it's got slow release fertilizer in the mix when I potted it, and then throughout the growing season. So basically from now on, I'm going to be liquid fertilizing it with a diluted solution of either a seaweed-based solution if it's a tonic, or a general all-purpose fertilizer, and I dial down the dilution to at least 1/8, 1/10 of what's recommended. Keep it lean, keep it mean. Overfeeding doesn't do anything any favors. So there we are. I had to share. Now the other news is, plant lovers of the world, that I've got another Cattleya in spike, and this is one which is a complete freak and an accident that I managed to buy one about 5 years ago that is a cross between two cooler growing species, or at least one anyway. When we come to make the video, I'll tell you more about that. I've had it for years. It has been through every possible catastrophe. It's been dropped, it's been snapped, it's had scale, it's had rot that's killed half of it, it had a sheath which rotted and died. But this year, and it's so vigorous, it just keeps growing and growing and growing. But this year, I've actually got buds that are about to open, which again, I can't believe, because that orchid has tortured me for 5 years. I've been schlepping it around every house I've moved to. Anyway, so we'll have another Cattleya follow-up in a couple of weeks when that one opens. It's stunning. But I'm just here to tell you, I can grow Cattleyas. Well, some of them. Okay, plant lovers, time to go. Ah, what joy, what celebration. Thank you very much for watching. And if you're in a climate like mine, don't give up. As Kate Bush said, you too can grow Cattleyas if you can find these cooler climate ones, generally from high altitudes. And Cattleya maxima, which I made a video about, which I killed almost the minute the flower stopped, and I've never been able to find one again. That is a great high altitude Cattleya to grow. There is also a lowland one, which likes more warmth and sunlight, but the higher altitude one can take cool temperatures. So I need to try and find that again. Ha! There we are. Thank you very much for watching. I hope wherever you are, all is well. And it's a tricky world at the moment, so I hope everyone is finding joy in their orchids, which are essentially peaceful and beautiful. And I very much look forward to seeing you next week. Now, who knows what it will be, but at some point soon, we'll visit that other Cattleya that is threatening to open and dance a celebration about that too. But until then, plant lovers, thank you very much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you next week.